The transport ship shuddered as it entered the orbital station's docking bay. Among the various alien species filing out, one figure stood out for all the wrong reasons. Jake Morrison, a human from Earth, carried nothing but a worn duffel bag and an expression of quiet determination. His clothes were simple, his gear outdated by galactic standards, and his species was known throughout the galaxy for one thing: being unremarkable. The Galactic Defense Coalition had been desperate enough to accept humans into their ranks only recently. Most commanders viewed Earth's inhabitants as a backup option, useful for grunt work but hardly suitable for specialized roles. Jake had applied for the elite Marksman division, a decision that had caused ripples of amusement throughout the command structure. Commander Zeftar, a towering Veloxian with forearms and scales that shifted color with his mood, watched the human approach through the station's main corridor. His scales flickered between purple and gold, the equivalent of barely contained laughter. "So this is the human who thinks he can outshoot a Catherian sniper," he muttered to his aide, Lieutenant Vexna. The lieutenant, a sleek Andromedans with silver skin and eyes like liquid mercury, consulted her data pad. His test scores were adequate, barely past the minimum requirements. His equipment requisition request was particularly amusing. She paused, her expression showing what humans might recognize as a smirk. He asked for something called a rifle and refused our standard plasma precision instruments. Jake had heard the whispers, seen the looks. Every species in the coalition had their specialties. The Catherians had perfect aim due to their compound eyes and steady appendages. The Zentorians could calculate wind resistance and trajectory in their heads faster than most computers. The Nebulon warriors had reflexes that operated in microseconds. Humans, they were just persistent. The orientation hall buzzed with conversations in dozens of languages, most of which Jake couldn't understand. Universal translators helped, but they couldn't translate the subtle mockery in alien body language. A group of Catherian snipers gestured in his direction, their 6 arms moving in what Jake had learned was their version of pointing and laughing. "Welcome to Station Omega 7, announced General Thaxulos, a massive titan whose voice rumbled through the hall like distant thunder. "You represent the finest marksmen from across 17 star systems. In the coming weeks, you'll train together, compete together, and hopefully prove worthy of the Coalition's elite sniper corps." The general's eyes, each the size of dinner plates, swept across the assembled recruits. When they landed on Jake, there was a pause that seemed to last forever. "I see we have our first human applicant. Interesting." The word interesting carried the same weight as disappointing might in human speech. Jake's quarters were smaller than the others, located in a section designated for experimental recruits. His roommate was Q-Lix, a Helionian whose species communicated primarily through color changes in their translucent skin. Clix's skin immediately turned a shade of blue that Jake's translator informed him meant confused pity. "You are the human marksman?" Q-Lix asked, his skin shifting to orange stripes. "I do not understand. Humans have no special shooting abilities, no enhanced vision, no steady appendages, no predictive brain functions. Why are you here?" Jake unpacked his gear, carefully assembling what looked like an antique to his alien companion. The rifle was a modified Earth design, sleek but clearly mechanical rather than energy-based. "Because someone has to represent my species," Jake replied simply. "And because I'm good at this." Clix's skin flashed bright yellow, which the translator indicated as amusement mixed with disbelief. "Good?" The Catherian squad leader hit targets at 12,000 meters during testing. The Zentorian twins can hit moving objects they can't even see yet, calculating their future positions. "What can you do?" Jake finished assembling his rifle and checked the scope. "I can hit what I aim at." The first training session took place in a massive simulation chamber that could recreate any environment in the known galaxy. The recruits were divided into teams for a basic accuracy test. Jake found himself paired with the worst performers from other species, the ones who had barely qualified. Even among the rejects, he stood out as the obvious weak link. Target practice began with stationary marks at 500 meters. The Catherians hit their targets before the simulation had fully loaded. The Zentorians calculated impossible angles and ricocheted shots around obstacles. The Nebulans moved so fast their shots seemed to fire before they had even aimed. Jake took his time, breathing steadily, feeling the weight of his rifle. When he fired, his shot hit center mass, Not the perfect bullseye achieved by others, but solid and reliable. A few aliens glanced over with what might have been surprise, but most were too busy showing off their own abilities to pay attention. The targets moved to 1,000 meters. Then 2,000. At each distance, Jake's performance remained consistent, while some of the flashier shooters began to struggle with the increased difficulty. His shots weren't the fastest or the most precise, but they found their mark every time. By the end of the session, Jake had quietly placed in the top third of all recruits. Not spectacular, but respectable. The other humans on the station heard about it and felt a flicker of pride, though they kept their celebrations quiet. The alien commanders noted his scores, but attributed them to luck or favorable simulation conditions. That evening in the mess hall, Jake sat alone while the various species clustered with their own kind. The food was nutritionally balanced for all species, but tasted like cardboard to human senses. He was halfway through his meal when Commander Zeftar approached, his scales showing the deep blue of professional interest mixed with skepticism. "Human Morrison," the commander said, settling his massive frame across from Jake. "Your performance today was unexpected, but one session does not make a marksman. Tomorrow we begin real training. Environmental challenges, moving targets, combat stress scenarios. Are you prepared for that?" Jake met the commander's gaze steadily. "Yes, sir." Zeftar's scales shifted to a lighter blue. "We shall see. Many recruits perform adequately in controlled conditions. True skill reveals itself only under pressure." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to what passed for a whisper among his species. "Between us, human, why do you think you can compete with species that have evolved specifically for precision shooting? What makes you believe you belong here?" Jake considered the question seriously. Around them, the mess hall continued its buzz of alien conversations, the click and whistle of languages that had developed on worlds he could barely imagine. Finally he spoke. "Because I've been shooting since I was 8 years old. Because I've spent more hours behind a rifle than most people spend sleeping. Because when everyone else is relying on natural advantages, I've had to rely on pure skill." He paused, taking another bite of the tasteless food. "And because somebody has to prove that humans belong in this galaxy." The commander's scales flickered through several colors before settling on something Jake's translator couldn't identify. Without another word, Zeftar stood and walked away, leaving Jake to finish his meal in contemplative silence. Outside the massive windows of the station, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of the species that had learned to travel between them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove himself or fail spectacularly. But tonight Jake Morrison cleaned his rifle and prepared for whatever the galaxy could throw at him. The middle of the night, though time had little meaning on a space station. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in red as recruits scrambled to the designated assembly point. Jake grabbed his gear and joined the flow of confused aliens rushing through the passages. "Combat simulation emergency," announced the station's AI in 17 different languages. "All marksman recruits report to Bay 12 immediately. This is not a drill." In Bay 12, Jake found chaos. The various alien species clustered together, chattering, in their native tongues while human translations struggled to keep up. Commander Zeftar stood at the center of the room, his scales showing the deep red of urgency and excitement. "Listen carefully," the commander began, his voice cutting through the noise. "We've just received word that coalition forces are pinned down on Kepler 442b. Hostile forces have taken positions in the canyon networks, and our ground troops can't advance without sniper support. This is your first real mission." A collective intake of breath rippled through the assembled recruits. Real combat, not simulation. Jake felt his heart rate increase but kept his expression calm. Around him, some of the alien recruits began displaying signs of stress or excitement specific to their species. "You'll be divided into 6 teams, Zeftar continued. "Each team will take a different canyon approach. Your job is to eliminate hostile snipers and provide cover for advancing troops. The environment is hostile. Gravity, 1.3 times Earth standard, thin atmosphere, extreme temperature variations, and winds that can shift direction without warning." Jake's team assignment flashed on his personal display, Team 6, designated as backup support. He wasn't surprised to find himself paired with the other lower-performing recruits. His teammates included Culix the Helionian, a nervous Zentaurian, named Kixistel who had barely passed the vision tests, and Yargoth, a young Nebulon whose reflexes were considered slow by his species standards. The transport to Kepler 442b took 3 hours, during which Jake studied everything he could about the mission environment. The planet was a desert world with massive canyon systems carved by ancient rivers. The hostile forces were a mix of pirates and separatists who had been using the canyons as a base for raids on coalition shipping. Yargoth, whose species normally moved too fast for human eyes to follow, seemed to vibrate with barely contained energy. "This is real," he kept saying, his words coming out in rapid bursts. "Actual combat, not simulation. Real targets that shoot back." Kixtel's normally steady hands shook as he checked his equipment for the 10th time. "What if I miss? What if my calculations are wrong? What if the wind readings are off?" Klix's skin cycled through nervous color patterns. "Team 6 always gets the worst assignments. We are the expendable ones. They send us where they expect casualties." Jake listened to his teammates' worries while methodically checking his own gear. His rifle was an older model by Galactic standards, but it was reliable, and he knew every part of it intimately. Unlike the complex energy weapons favored by other species, his projectile weapon had fewer variables to account for. No power fluctuations, no heat buildup, no electromagnetic interference, just physics and skill. The planet's surface hit them like a furnace when they emerged from the transport. Even through their environmental suits, Jake could feel the crushing weight of the increased gravity. His teammates struggled with the conditions immediately. Kulix's skin flashed distress patterns, Kixtel's calculations went haywire in the denser atmosphere, and Yargoth's famous speed was reduced to human-level movement. Their assigned position was Outcrop 7, a rocky formation overlooking Canyon Network Delta. Intelligence reported at least 3 enemy snipers in the area, using the canyon walls for cover while picking off coalition forces trying to advance through the narrow passages below. Jake set up his position while his teammates established their own firing points. Through his scope, he could see the canyon stretching out below, its red walls carved into impossible formations by millennia of erosion. Somewhere in those rocks, enemy snipers waited. "Contact," whispered Kulix, his skin flashing the dim purple that indicated target acquisition. "Movement, grid reference 234.7, range approximately 800 meters. Jake swung his rifle toward the indicated position. Through his scope, he caught a glimpse of reflected light off what might have been a weapon scope. The enemy sniper was well hidden, using a natural cave formation for cover with only the smallest portion of his position visible. Kixtel was frantically running calculations on his targeting computer. Wind speed variable, gravity compensation, factor unknown, atmospheric density affecting projectile physics. I cannot get a clean solution. Yargoth tried to steady his aim, but the increased gravity threw off his normally perfect balance. I can see the target, but I cannot hold steady. My reflexes are too slow in this environment. The enemy sniper fired, the shot echoing through the canyon. Below them, a coalition soldier cried out and fell behind cover. More shots followed from hidden positions. The enemy had the high ground and superior cover. Coalition forces were sitting ducks. Team 6, report status. Commander Zeftar's voice crackled through their communications. Unable to engage effectively, Kulix replied, his skin showing the gray of defeat. Environmental conditions are hampering our species-specific advantages. Jake had been listening to the exchange while studying the canyon through his scope. He could see the muzzle flashes from enemy positions, could read the wind patterns from the way dust moved along the canyon walls. Where his teammates saw impossible variables, he saw a solvable problem. "Permission to engage, Commander," Jake said quietly into his comm. There was a pause. "Negative, Morrison. Wait for the primary teams to neutralize targets." But the primary teams were having their own problems. Over the comm, Jake could hear reports of equipment malfunctions, environmental interference, and missed shots. The Catherians' compound eyes were struggling with the planet's unusual light spectrum. The Zentaurians' computers couldn't compensate for the atmospheric density. The Nebulan's speed meant nothing when they couldn't maintain stability. Another coalition soldier fell. Then another. Jake made a decision that would define not just his career, but how the galaxy viewed his entire species. He adjusted his scope, compensated for wind and gravity through instinct and experience rather than computer calculation, and lined up his shot. The enemy sniper was good, revealing only the smallest portion of his position when he fired. Jake would have one chance, maybe two, before the target repositioned. He controlled his breathing, felt his heartbeat, and squeezed the trigger during the natural pause between beats. The shot crossed 800 meters of hostile atmosphere and found its target. The enemy sniper's position went silent. Hostile down, Jake reported calmly, already shifting to acquire the next target. His teammates stared at him in shock. Kulix's skin flashed colors that had no translation. Kixtel stopped his frantic calculations. Yargoth went perfectly still, watching Jake work. The second enemy sniper, alerted by his companion's fate, tried a different approach. He moved positions rapidly, using the canyon walls for cover. Jake tracked the movement through his scope, anticipating rather than following. When the enemy sniper emerged from cover to take his shot, Jake was already waiting. The second shot was clean, professional, final. 2 down, 1 to go. The third sniper had learned from watching his companions die. He stayed deep in cover, firing only quick shots before immediately moving. It was a smart strategy against normal opponents. But Jake had grown up hunting deer that used similar tactics, had spent years learning to read terrain and predict movement patterns. He waited. Patience was something humans had in abundance, something that most other species struggled with in combat situations. Minutes passed. The coalition forces below remained pinned down, but they were no longer taking casualties. Finally, the third sniper made his mistake. He moved to a position that offered a better angle on the coalition troops, but exposed him for just a moment to Jake's overwatch position. The shot was longer this time, over 1,000 meters, with a tricky crosswind and an upward angle that would challenge any marksman. Jake's rifle spoke once more and the canyon fell silent. All hostile snipers neutralized, Jake reported. Coalition forces are clear to advance. The comm channels erupted in surprised voices. Commander Zeftar's voice cut through the chatter. Team 6, confirm last transmission. Did you say all targets neutralized? Confirmed, sir. 3 enemy snipers eliminated by Morrison. The silence that followed lasted so long that Jake thought his comm might be malfunctioning. When Zeftar finally spoke, his voice carried undertones that Jake's translator couldn't interpret. Outstanding work, Team 6. Maintain overwatch until coalition forces secure the canyon. As Jake watched coalition troops advance safely through the canyon below, his teammates gradually emerged from their own shock. Kulix's skin showed colors of amazement and respect. Kix still approached with his targeting computer, studying the data from Jake's shots with obvious bewilderment. How? Yargoth asked simply. No computer assistance, no species advantages, hostile environment. How did you make those shots when we could not? Jake secured his rifle and looked out over the canyon where coalition forces were now advancing without fear. Practice, he said. News of the Kepler 442b mission spread through the station faster than Jake had thought possible. Within hours of returning, he found himself the center of attention in ways that made him deeply uncomfortable. Aliens who had previously ignored him now stopped to stare. Some approached with questions, others with challenges, and a few with what seemed like genuine curiosity. The Catherian sniper squad, led by Sekthari, cornered Jake in the equipment bay 3 days after the mission. Sekthari's 6 arms moved in patterns that Jake's translator identified as aggressive posturing, while his compound eyes fixed on the human with unsettling intensity. Your performance was lucky, Sekthari stated, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made Catherian speech sound like musical instruments. 3 shots in ideal conditions prove nothing. I have eliminated 47 confirmed targets across 12 star systems. My accuracy rating exceeds 99.7% across all environmental conditions. Jake continued cleaning his rifle, a ritual that had become meditation for him. Congratulations, he said simply. The response clearly wasn't what Sekthari expected. His arms shifted to what might have been confusion mixed with irritation. You do not understand. I am challenging your competence. Your species lacks the biological advantages necessary for precision shooting. What happened on Kepler was an anomaly. Other recruits had gathered to watch the confrontation. Jake could feel their attention like physical weight. Some were clearly hoping to see the upstart human put in his place. Others seemed genuinely curious about how he would respond. Maybe, Jake agreed, setting down his cleaning kit. Want to find out? The challenge was set for the following day in Simulation Bay Alpha, the station's most advanced training facility. Word spread quickly, and Jake soon realized that what had started as a simple disagreement had become something much larger. Aliens throughout the station were placing bets, forming opinions, and treating the contest as a referendum on human capabilities. Commander Zeftar appeared at Jake's quarters that evening, his scales showing colors that suggested concern, mixed with anticipation. Morrison, you understand what you've agreed to? Sekthari is considered one of the finest marksmen in the Coalition. His species has been perfecting precision shooting for over 3,000 years. Jake looked up from the technical manual he was studying. Yes, sir. His 6 arms provide perfect stability. His compound eyes can track multiple targets simultaneously, while calculating range and environmental factors. His reaction time is measured in microseconds. Zeftar's scale shifted to deeper blue. What advantage do you have? The question hung in the air between them. Jake considered it seriously, thinking about everything that had brought him to this moment. His childhood in rural Montana, learning to hunt with his grandfather. Years of competitive shooting on Earth. The countless hours spent practicing until his rifle became an extension of his body. I've been thinking about that, Jake said finally. Everyone keeps talking about biological advantages, natural abilities, evolutionary specializations. But I think there might be something they're missing. Zeftar's interest was clearly piqued. Which is? Adaptability. Every other species here evolved for specific conditions on their homeworlds. They're optimized for their environments. But humans? We're generalists. We evolved to adapt to changing conditions to survive in any environment we find ourselves in. Jake closed the manual and met the commander's gaze. Maybe that's an advantage too. The simulation bay was packed when Jake arrived the next morning. Representatives from every species on the station had gathered to watch. The betting pools had grown so large that station security had been forced to intervene to prevent gambling-related disputes. Sekthari was already in position, his 6 arms moving with mechanical precision as he calibrated his weapon. The Catherian's compound eyes tracked multiple data streams simultaneously while his targeting computer processed environmental variables at superhuman speed. Conditions will be randomly generated, announced Lieutenant Vexna, serving as the official judge. 5 scenarios increasing in difficulty. Targets will be both stationary and mobile. Environmental factors will include wind, gravity variations, atmospheric interference, and electromagnetic disturbance. Jake nodded and took his position. His rifle looked primitive compared to Sekthari's advanced plasma weapon, but it felt right in his hands. Familiar, reliable. The first scenario loaded, a desert environment similar to Kepler 442b. 5 targets at varying ranges, stationary but partially concealed. Both shooters had 2 minutes to eliminate all targets. Sekthari's arms moved like a machine, his targeting system locking onto each mark in sequence. His shots were perfectly placed, each target eliminated with mathematical precision. Time, 93 seconds. Jake approached the challenge differently. He studied the terrain, noted wind patterns, observed how heat shimmer affected visibility. When he began shooting, his movements were fluid rather than mechanical. Each shot was different, adapted to the specific conditions affecting that particular target. Time 97 seconds, round 1, tie, Vexna announced. Both contestants eliminated all targets successfully. The second scenario was more challenging, a low-gravity asteroid mining facility, with moving targets and shifting magnetic fields that could affect weapon systems. Sekthari's plasma weapon began showing slight accuracy degradation due to electromagnetic interference, but his biological advantages kept his performance within acceptable parameters. Jake's projectile weapon was unaffected by the electromagnetic disturbance, but the low gravity threw off his normal shooting stance. He adapted by changing his position, using the facility's structure for stability in ways that hadn't occurred to his opponent. Both shooters succeeded, but Jake's time was marginally better. The crowd's murmur grew louder. This wasn't supposed to be competitive. Humans weren't supposed to be able to match Catherian precision. The third scenario pushed both shooters to their limits. A space platform in a debris field with targets moving in 3 dimensions, variable artificial gravity, and atmospheric composition that changed mid-scenario. Sagthari's targeting computer struggled to keep up with the rapidly changing conditions. His shots became less precise as his systems tried to compensate for variables they hadn't been programmed to handle. Jake found himself entering a state he'd experienced only a few times before, usually during the most challenging hunts of his youth. Time seemed to slow down. His awareness expanded to encompass every variable simultaneously: wind patterns, gravity fluctuations, target movement, atmospheric density, even the subtle vibrations of the platform itself. He stopped thinking and started feeling his way through the scenario. When the simulation ended, Jake had eliminated all targets with time to spare. Sagthari had missed 2 shots, something that visibly shook the Catherian marksman. The 4th scenario was designed to be nearly impossible: a high-speed pursuit through a city environment with targets appearing randomly, while the shooter moved through a complex obstacle course. Sagthari's compound eyes should have given him an insurmountable advantage in tracking multiple fast-moving targets. But the scenario required more than just biological advantages. It required intuition, instinct, and the ability to make split-second decisions based on incomplete information. Jake moved through the course like he was born to it, his shots finding targets that his conscious mind had barely registered. Sagthari, for all his biological superiority, couldn't adapt fast enough to the chaos of the scenario. His systems needed time to process and calculate. Jake had learned to trust his instincts instead of fighting them. When the 4th round ended, the silence in the observation area was absolute. Jake had won decisively, and everyone knew it. The 5th scenario never loaded. Sagthari stood slowly, his arms hanging at his sides in what Jake recognized as a gesture of defeat among his species. "I do not understand," the Catherian said, his voice subdued. "My equipment is superior. My physical advantages are measurable and significant. My training has been extensive and thorough. How can this be possible?" Jake considered the question while securing his rifle. Around them, the crowd of observers was slowly dispersing, many looking thoughtful and confused. "I think," Jake said carefully, "you've been thinking about shooting as a technical problem, something that can be solved with better equipment and perfect calculations. But shooting isn't just technical. It's also about reading situations, adapting to unexpected conditions, and trusting your instincts when your calculations don't have enough data." Sagthari's compound eyes focused on Jake with new intensity. "You are saying that precision shooting requires more than precision?" "I'm saying that sometimes the best shot isn't the most technically perfect one. Sometimes it's the one that adapts to what's actually happening instead of what should be happening." Later that evening, Jake found himself once again eating alone in the mess hall. Though now the solitude was by choice rather than social isolation, several aliens had approached him throughout the day, some offering congratulations, others asking questions about human shooting techniques, and a few proposing various forms of collaboration or training exchange. Commander Zeftar approached with what had become a familiar routine. "Morrison, you realize what you've accomplished." The message came through official channels 3 weeks after Jake's contest with Sagthari. Emergency deployment orders, classified priority level alpha, destination coordinates that placed them deep in disputed territory near the Vorthan Nebula. Jake read the orders twice, making sure he understood correctly. He wasn't being sent as backup or support. He was being assigned to Alpha Team, the Coalition's elite rapid response unit. His teammates for this mission read like a roster of the galaxy's most decorated marksmen. Rayshon the Andromedans, whose liquid mercury eyes could track targets across impossible distances. Thokmor the Titan, whose massive frame could stabilize weapons that would knock other species off their feet. Zixaria the Voidwalker, whose species existed partially, outside normal spacetime and could predict target movement before it happened. The mission briefing took place in a secure chamber that blocked all forms of electronic surveillance. General Thaxelos himself presided, his massive form filling one end of the room while holographic displays showed tactical information that made Jake's blood run cold. 3 days ago, Coalition intelligence lost contact with Deep Space Research Station Prometheus, the general began, his voice like distant thunder. Initial investigation revealed that the station has been captured by the Hegemony, who are using it as a forward base for operations against our shipping lanes. The holographic display shifted to show the research station, a massive structure built into an asteroid and bristling with defensive systems. Jake studied the layout while listening to the tactical summary. Standard assault would be impossible without destroying the station and everyone aboard. We have confirmed that over 300 Coalition scientists and researchers are being held hostage. The Hegemony has positioned snipers throughout the station's structure, making any rescue attempt extremely hazardous. Rayshawn's mercury eyes shifted patterns as she processed the tactical data. Estimated enemy sniper count? Between 15 and 20 confirmed positions. Unknown total numbers. They've had 3 days to fortify and prepare. The general's expression grew grimmer. Intelligence suggests they're expecting a rescue attempt and have planned accordingly. Thokmore's massive hands gestured toward the display. Defensive positions appear to be layered. Multiple fallback points. They can retreat deeper into the station while maintaining covering fire. Zixaria's form flickered slightly as she accessed her species' unique temporal perception. I see multiple probability streams. Many end in significant casualties for both hostages and rescue forces. The Hegemony snipers are skilled and well-positioned. Jake studied the station layout while his teammates discussed the technical challenges. The Hegemony had chosen their positions well. Long corridors with limited cover, multiple levels with overlapping fields of fire, and the ever-present threat that any aggressive action could result in hostage casualties. Morrison, General Thaxulos said suddenly. Analysis? All eyes turned to Jake. He could feel the weight of their attention, the unspoken question of whether the human could contribute meaningfully to this level of tactical planning. They're fighting defensively, Jake said finally, which means they're thinking like defenders. Predictable positions, predetermined fallback routes, established fields of fire. But that predictability can be a weakness if we approach it differently. Rayshawn's eyes shifted to a pattern that indicated skepticism. How do you mean? Jake pointed to several sections of the station layout. Look at their sniper positions. They're all optimized for stopping an advancing force. But what if we don't advance the way they expect? What if instead of moving through the main corridors, we create our own approach routes? The room fell silent as the other team members considered this. Thokmore was the first to speak. You're suggesting we breach the station hull directly? That would require precise placement to avoid damaging life support systems. And precise shooting to neutralize snipers who won't be expecting attacks from those angles, Jake added. Zixaria's form stabilized as she focused on this new probability stream. Interesting. The temporal probability lines shift significantly if we approach from unexpected vectors. Casualty estimates decrease. Mission success probability increases. The plan that emerged from the following hours of discussion was unlike anything in standard Coalition tactical doctrine. Instead of a conventional assault, Alpha Team would approach the station in specialized breach pods, each targeting a different section of the hull. They would create multiple entry points simultaneously, forcing the Hegemony snipers to defend against attacks from directions they hadn't prepared for. Jake's role was crucial. He would be responsible for neutralizing the enemy snipers who repositioned to counter the unconventional attack. While his teammates secured entry points and began hostage extraction, he would provide overwatch and eliminate targets of opportunity. The approach flight to Station Prometheus took 18 hours, during which Jake found himself getting to know his teammates in ways that the station's formal environment had never allowed. Rayshawn, despite her species' reputation for emotional detachment, was intensely curious about human shooting techniques. Thokmore, whose size made him seem imposing, was actually gentle and thoughtful, approaching combat as a necessary evil rather than a preferred solution. Zixaria was the most intriguing. Her ability to perceive multiple probability streams meant she experienced reality differently than linear species like humans. She saw potential futures branching and converging, possibilities forming and dissolving, based on tiny changes in current conditions. Your presence changes the probability streams in unexpected ways, she told Jake during one of their planning sessions. Most marksmen create patterns that I can predict, but your shooting style introduces variables that make the future more fluid, Jake. Wasn't sure whether that was a compliment or a warning. The station appeared on their screens like a dark tumor against the starfield, its lights dim and emergency systems flickering. Intelligence reports indicated that the hegemony had disabled most of the station's defensive systems, but left life support operational for the hostages. "Remember," came General Thaxilos's voice over the comm as they prepared for insertion. "The primary objective is hostage rescue. Everything else is secondary. Do not take unnecessary risks." Jake sealed his helmet and checked his weapon one final time. The mission called for a modified version of his standard rifle, equipped with muzzle flash suppressors and specialized ammunition, designed to minimize the risk of hull breach. Every shot would need to be precisely placed not just to hit the target, but to avoid damaging critical systems. The breach pods launched simultaneously, 4 small craft separating and heading for different sections of the station. Jake's pod was equipped with specialized cutting equipment that would allow him to create his own entry point, rather than using existing airlocks or corridors. As they approached the station, Jake could see the hegemony defensive positions through his scope. Snipers at predetermined locations, exactly where the tactical analysis had predicted. They were watching the main approach routes, ready for a conventional assault that wasn't coming. Jake's pod hit the station hull with barely perceptible impact. The cutting equipment worked silently, creating a breach just large enough for one person. Within minutes, he was inside the station, floating in zero gravity through a maintenance area that the hegemony had probably forgotten existed. Through his comm, he could hear his teammates reporting successful breaches at their own entry points. The operation was proceeding according to plan, but Jake knew that the real test was just beginning. He moved carefully through the maintenance corridors, using his knowledge of station layouts to navigate toward the central hub, where most of the hostages were being held. Through gaps in the bulkheads, he could see enemy snipers beginning to realize that something was wrong. Their neat defensive positions were suddenly facing threats from directions they hadn't prepared for. Jake's first target was a hegemony sniper, who had abandoned his primary position to cover one of the breach points. The enemy soldier was focused on the corridor below, unaware that he was being watched from above through a maintenance grating. The shot was clean and silent. The sniper simply stopped moving, his weapon drifting away in the zero gravity. Jake was already moving to his next position before the body had time to float more than a few feet. Over the comm, he could hear the sounds of the rescue operation proceeding. Rayshawn reported hostages secured in Section C. Thokmer was systematically clearing hegemony positions with methodical precision. Zixaria moved through the station like a ghost, appearing where enemies least expected her. But the hegemony soldiers were adapting faster than expected. Jake watched through his scope as they began repositioning, trying to establish new defensive lines to counter the unconventional assault. One group was moving toward the hostage-holding area, clearly intending to use the prisoners as human shields if the situation deteriorated further. Jake found himself facing a decision that would define the entire mission. He could continue providing support for his teammates' assigned objectives, or he could take initiative to prevent a hostage crisis that wasn't part of the original plan. He chose initiative, moving through the station. The rescue of Station Prometheus became a turning point that rippled through the Coalition's command structure in ways Jake hadn't anticipated. Within days of their return, he found himself summoned to meetings with generals, intelligence officers, and tactical planners who wanted to understand how a human marksman had performed actions that their computer models said should have been impossible. The debriefing sessions were intense and thorough. Every shot Jake had taken was analyzed, every decision questioned and examined. What emerged from these sessions wasn't just recognition of his individual performance, but a growing realization that human capabilities had been systematically underestimated. "Your species approaches combat differently than any we've encountered," Admiral Cathera observed during one session. The crystalline officer's faceted form reflected light in patterns that indicated deep contemplation. Other species optimize for their strengths. Humans seem to optimize for adaptation itself. Jake had been hearing variations of this observation frequently, but he was beginning to understand its implications. "With respect, Admiral, I think it's more than that. Most species here evolved for specific environments and developed specialized abilities as a result. Humans evolved on a planet with constantly changing conditions. We learned to survive by being flexible rather than perfect. The Admiral's crystalline structure shifted patterns. Explain. Take the Prometheus mission. Everyone else was thinking about how to use their natural advantages in that environment. Rayshawn was calculating optimal sight lines for her enhanced vision. Thuckmore was considering how his strength could overcome defensive positions. Sixaria was reading probability streams. Jake paused, organizing his thoughts. I was thinking about how to change the environment to my advantage instead of adapting to it. This perspective was apparently revolutionary enough to warrant a complete review of human recruitment and training protocols. Jake found himself assigned to a new position, Human Integration Specialist, tasked with developing training programs that would help other humans succeed in coalition forces. The assignment came with its own challenges. The handful of humans already in coalition service had been selected for roles that played to perceived human weaknesses rather than potential strengths. They were logistics specialists, maintenance technicians, and administrative personnel. None had been given opportunities to demonstrate capabilities in combat roles. Jake's first assignment was to evaluate a group of human volunteers for potential inclusion in specialized units. The candidates were diverse. Former military personnel from Earth's various national forces, competitive shooters, hunters, even a few professional video game players whose reaction times and spatial awareness had tested remarkably high. Among them was Sarah Chen, a former competitive archer whose application had been rejected 3 times by coalition recruitment. Her file showed exceptional accuracy scores, but her equipment preferences had been deemed unsuitable for modern warfare. She used a compound bow, a weapon that most coalition officers considered a historical curiosity. Why archery? Jake asked during her interview. Sarah's expression was serious as she considered the question. Same reason you use a projectile rifle instead of energy weapons, I suspect. Consistency, reliability, and complete control over every variable. No power cells to fail. No electromagnetic interference, no heat buildup. Just physics and skill. Jake was intrigued. Show me. The demonstration took place in one of the station's holographic training bays, configured to simulate various combat environments. Sarah's performance was quietly spectacular. Her arrows found targets at ranges that challenged most energy weapons, and her ability to calculate trajectory, wind resistance, and target movement was entirely intuitive. Interesting, Commander Zeftar observed, watching Sarah put arrow after arrow into targets at extreme range, silent. No electromagnetic signature, no heat signature, completely immune to electronic countermeasures. And completely impossible according to our tactical doctrine, added Lieutenant Vexna. Projectile weapons are considered obsolete, primitive. Jake watched Sarah thread an arrow through a gap barely wider than the shaft itself to hit a target hidden behind cover. Maybe our definition of primitive needs updating. The training program that emerged from these evaluations was unlike anything in coalition military history. Instead of trying to make humans excel at alien specializations, it focused on identifying and developing uniquely human capabilities: adaptability, improvisation, pattern recognition, intuitive problem solving, and the ability to function effectively in chaotic or unpredictable situations. The first class of human specialists graduated 6 months after the Prometheus mission. They included Sarah Chen and her compound bow, Marcus Rodriguez with his modified Earth-style sniper rifle, Diana Kozlov, whose background in extreme environment survival made her invaluable for hostile planet operations, and 12 others whose skills represented capabilities the Coalition hadn't known it needed. Their first deployment came sooner than anyone expected. The crisis developed on Tethyan Prime, a heavily populated world where coalition forces were trying to maintain peace between warring factions. The situation had devolved into urban warfare, with snipers from both sides turning the capital city into a deadly maze where coalition peacekeepers couldn't operate effectively. Traditional coalition tactics weren't working. The Catherian snipers couldn't adapt quickly enough to the constantly changing urban environment. Zentorian calculation-based approaches failed when faced with opponents who didn't follow predictable patterns. Nebulon speed advantages were negated by the need for careful target identification in areas crowded with civilians. Jake's human specialist team was deployed as an experimental unit, tasked with establishing safe corridors for civilian evacuation. Their approach was unlike anything the local commanders had seen before. Instead of trying to dominate the battlefield through superior firepower or technology, the humans began reading the city like a living thing. They identified patterns in enemy movement, predicted where snipers would position themselves, and established overwatch positions that provided maximum coverage with minimal exposure. Sarah Chen's archery proved particularly effective in the urban environment. Her arrows were silent, leaving enemy snipers unaware that their positions had been compromised until it was too late. Marcus Rodriguez used his intimate knowledge of urban terrain to find shooting positions that enemy snipers hadn't anticipated. Diana Kozlov led civilian evacuation teams through routes that avoided known danger areas, but it was Jake who made the breakthrough that changed everything. He was providing overwatch for an evacuation convoy when he noticed something that had escaped everyone else's attention. The enemy snipers weren't just shooting at targets of opportunity. They were communicating with each other, coordinating their fire to create overlapping kill zones that trapped coalition forces in predetermined areas. Most importantly, they were doing it without electronic communication, using visual signals that coalition monitoring equipment couldn't detect. Jake began mapping the signal patterns, tracking how information moved between enemy positions. Within hours, he'd identified the key nodes in their communication network. Instead of hunting individual snipers, he began targeting the spotters and signal coordinators who enabled their coordination. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Enemy sniper effectiveness dropped by over 60% as their ability to coordinate attacks collapsed. Coalition forces could finally move freely through areas that had been death traps just hours before. "How did you see this when our intelligence specialists missed it?" General Thaxulos asked during the after-action briefing. Jake considered the question carefully. "I think it's because I was looking for human-style solutions to the problem. Most of our intelligence analysis focuses on technological communication methods, but humans have been coordinating military actions without technology for thousands of years. Once I started thinking about how I would coordinate sniper teams without radios, the patterns became obvious. The success on Tethyan Prime led to rapid expansion of the Human Specialist Program. More humans were recruited, trained, and deployed to situations where conventional coalition forces had struggled. They became troubleshooters, sent to environments and situations that didn't respond well to standard approaches. Jake found himself promoted again, this time to Tactical Innovation Director, responsible for developing new approaches to problems that existing coalition doctrine couldn't solve. It was a position that had never existed before, created specifically to leverage the unique perspective that humans brought to military operations. But with success came new challenges. Not everyone in the coalition was comfortable with the rapid rise of human influence in military affairs. Some species saw human success as diminishing their own importance. Others questioned whether humans could be trusted with significant responsibilities so soon after joining the coalition. The controversy came to a head during a meeting of the Coalition Military Council, where senior officers from every member species gathered to discuss strategic priorities. Jake was there to present a proposal for expanding human integration into specialized units across all coalition forces. "The proposal is premature," argued. The Admiral's challenge came in the form of an invitation that Jake couldn't refuse without losing face for his entire species. The Catherian Military Academy would host an unprecedented competition, the Galactic Marksman Tournament, open to the finest shooters from every coalition species. The winner would be declared the coalition's premier sniper and granted authority to establish training protocols for all specialized marksman units. "It's a trap," Sarah Chen said bluntly during the planning session in Jake's quarters. "They're not just challenging you individually. They're using this tournament to settle the question of human military credibility once and for all." Marcus Rodriguez nodded agreement while cleaning his rifle. "Win, and we prove humans belong at the top levels of coalition forces. Lose and we get relegated back to support roles for the next century." Jake understood the stakes. Word of the tournament had spread throughout the station, and betting pools were forming among every species represented. The pressure was enormous, but so was the opportunity. "Tell me about the other competitors," Jake said, reviewing the files that Diana Kozlov had compiled. "Sekathari will represent the Catherians, obviously. His accuracy record is still unmatched by anyone except you." Diana's fingers moved across the holographic display, highlighting each contestant. The Zentorians are sending Kixyalth, whose computational shooting abilities are legendary. The Nebulans chose Valkyra, who holds speed shooting records across 12 different weapon systems. The list continued. Gorthak the Titan, whose massive frame could handle weapons that would cripple other species. Saidlenth the Voidwalker, whose temporal perception abilities allowed him to shoot targets that hadn't appeared yet. Representatives from the Crystalline Collective, the Gaseous Consortium, even the enigmatic energy beings who rarely participated in physical competitions. 15 species, 15 specialists, each representing the pinnacle of their evolutionary advantages, Jake summarized, and one human with a projectile rifle. One human who's already beaten the supposed best marksman from the most specialized shooting species in the galaxy, Sarah corrected. Don't sell yourself short. The tournament would take place over 5 days on Nexus Station, a neutral facility in the Galactic core that served as the Coalition's diplomatic center. The venue itself was designed to test every aspect of marksmanship: precision, speed, adaptability, performance under stress, and the ability to function in hostile environments. Jake's arrival at Nexus Station drew attention from media representatives across the galaxy. Humans were still enough of a novelty that his participation generated significant interest, but the coverage focused more on curiosity than expectation of success. The general consensus seemed to be that Jake's presence was symbolic rather than competitive. The opening ceremony was held in the station's main amphitheater, with representatives from every Coalition species in attendance. Jake found himself seated with the other competitors, feeling distinctly out of place among beings whose natural abilities had been honed by millions of years of evolution. Admiral Vorthak delivered the opening address, his 6 arms moving in ceremonial patterns while his compound eyes tracked every detail of the assembled crowd. This tournament represents more than competition between individuals. It is a demonstration of the capabilities that each species brings to our collective defense. May the superior marksman demonstrate the superior approach to precision warfare. The words were carefully chosen, and Jake caught the implication. This wasn't just about individual skill. It was about proving which species had the right to lead the Coalition's specialized forces. The first day of competition focused on pure accuracy, stationary targets at increasing distances under perfect conditions. It was designed to showcase the natural advantages that each species brought to marksmanship, and the results were predictable. Sekthari's performance was flawless, hitting targets at ranges that pushed the limits of the testing facility. Kixyalth's computational abilities allowed him to calculate perfect shots for conditions that changed mid-scenario. Valkyra's speed was so extraordinary that she could complete accuracy courses before other competitors had finished aiming their first shots. Jake placed 7th overall, a respectable showing but hardly dominant. His shooting was consistent and reliable, but lacked the spectacular precision or speed that characterized the leaders. Day 1 goes according to expectations, reported Galactic News Network. The specialized species maintain their advantages in controlled conditions, while the human competitor demonstrates adequate but unremarkable performance. The second day introduced environmental challenges: shooting in various atmospheric conditions, gravity variations, electromagnetic interference, and temperature extremes. This was where Jake had expected to see his adaptability advantage emerge. But the results were mixed. Some competitors struggled with conditions outside their evolutionary parameters, but others adapted their technology and techniques effectively. Sekthari's equipment handled environmental variables automatically. Kixyalth simply recalculated for new conditions faster than environmental factors could change. Jake performed better in the environmental challenges, moving up to 5th place overall, but he was still trailing significantly behind the leaders. The third day changed everything. The scenario was chaos warfare, multiple targets appearing simultaneously in unpredictable patterns, while environmental conditions shifted randomly. Competitors had to track threats, prioritize targets, and maintain accuracy while dealing with constant change. This was where evolutionary specialization became a liability. Sekthari's targeting systems couldn't process the random variables fast enough. Kixyalth's computational approach failed when faced with data that changed faster than he could calculate. Valkyra's speed became a disadvantage when rapid firing reduced accuracy below acceptable levels. Jake moved through the chaos scenario like he had been born for it. Instead of fighting the unpredictability, he embraced it. Instead of trying to calculate optimal solutions, he trusted his instincts and adapted to changing conditions in real time. When the third day ended, Jake had taken the overall lead. The reaction from the galactic media was explosive. Species that had dominated military specializations for millennia were being outperformed by a human using supposedly primitive techniques. Betting odds shifted dramatically. Political implications began emerging as various species reconsidered their assumptions about military hierarchy. The human's performance raises questions about the fundamental principles underlying coalition military doctrine, reported the Zentorian Strategic Analysis Network. If specialized evolutionary advantages can be overcome by adaptive techniques, what does this mean for species-based military assignments? The fourth day was psychological warfare, shooting under extreme stress while dealing with distractions, deceptions, and pressure designed to break concentration. Competitors faced scenarios that tested mental resilience as much as physical skill. This was where Jake's background became crucial. He had grown up hunting in conditions where missing meant going hungry. He had trained for competitions where success meant everything and failure meant nothing. More importantly, he had learned to shoot when people were counting on him, when lives depended on his accuracy. The psychological pressure scenarios didn't intimidate him. They focused him. While other competitors struggled with artificial stress factors, Jake found himself entering the zone of perfect concentration that every marksman sought but few achieved. His shots became automatic, his movement fluid. His awareness expanded to encompass every relevant variable simultaneously. By the end of day 4, Jake's lead was substantial enough that some competitors were beginning to withdraw from the tournament. The mathematical possibility of catching up was disappearing, and the political implications of losing to a human were becoming too significant for some species to accept. "This is unprecedented," Admiral Vorthak announced during the evening briefing. The tournament was designed to showcase the superiority of evolutionary specialization in precision warfare. Instead, it has demonstrated the potential effectiveness of adaptive generalization. Jake could hear the reluctance in the Admiral's voice, but also a growing recognition that the original assumptions might have been flawed. The final day would test everything simultaneously: precision, speed, adaptation, stress resistance, and tactical thinking. The scenario was a simulated rescue operation in a hostile environment, with multiple variables changing constantly. Competitors would have to save hostages while eliminating threats, all while dealing with equipment failures, environmental hazards, and time pressure. As Jake prepared for the final competition, he realized that win or lose, this tournament had already changed everything. The galaxy's perception of human capabilities had shifted fundamentally. The coalition's military doctrine would have to adapt to accommodate new possibilities. But more than that, Jake understood that he was no longer just representing himself or even his species. He was representing a different philosophy of warfare, one that valued adaptability over specialization, innovation over optimization, and practical effectiveness over theoretical perfection. The final scenario loaded, and Jake took his position alongside the remaining competitors. Through the viewing, the final scenario erupted into controlled chaos from the first moment. The simulation recreated a coalition research facility under siege, with hostages scattered throughout a complex structure, while enemy forces maintained overlapping fields of fire from strategic positions. Environmental conditions shifted every few minutes. Gravity fluctuations, atmospheric composition changes, electromagnetic storms that interfered with targeting systems. Jake moved through the scenario like water flowing around obstacles, adapting to each change without fighting against it, while his remaining competitors struggled to recalibrate their systems for each environmental shift. Jake simply adjusted his technique and continued engaging targets. Sekathari, despite his advanced targeting systems, found himself constantly behind the changing conditions. His equipment needed time to analyze and compensate for variables, time that the scenario didn't provide. When gravity suddenly shifted to 0.7 standard, his targeting computer spent precious seconds recalculating trajectory tables while Jake was already adapting his aim. Intuitively, Kixyalt's computational approach failed completely when electromagnetic interference rendered his calculation systems unreliable. Without his technological advantages, the Zentorian's natural abilities were impressive but not exceptional. He withdrew from the competition after missing 3 consecutive shots, something that had never happened to him before. Valkyra's legendary speed became a liability when rapid environmental changes required careful aim rather than quick shooting. Her attempts to maintain her usual pace resulted in missed shots and eliminated hostages, forcing her to slow down to human-level engagement speeds, one by one. The specialized marksmen encountered scenarios where their evolutionary advantages became limitations. The Titan competitor's massive size made movement difficult in the facility's cramped spaces. The Voidwalker's temporal perception was disrupted by the simulation's random time dilation effects. The crystalline representatives' perfect geometric calculations were rendered useless by irregular surfaces and unpredictable ricochet patterns. Jake found himself alone in the final phase of the competition, the only competitor still actively engaging the scenario. Around him, the simulation had evolved into something approaching real combat. Multiple threat sources, civilians in danger, equipment failures, and a ticking clock that measured how long the facility could maintain life support. This was no longer about marksmanship. It was about leadership under impossible conditions. Through his rifle scope, Jake tracked enemy movement patterns while simultaneously monitoring hostage locations and calculating safe extraction routes. He wasn't just shooting targets. He was conducting a rescue operation. Every shot had to be precisely placed not just to eliminate threats, but to avoid endangering civilians or damaging critical systems. The enemy forces in the simulation were programmed with advanced AI that learned from engagement patterns. As Jake eliminated snipers from expected positions, the remaining forces adapted, taking cover in locations that made clean shots nearly impossible. They began using hostages as human shields, forcing Jake to find angles that seemed geometrically impossible. Time pressure mounted as life support systems began failing throughout the simulated facility. Jake had to prioritize, save the hostages he could reach quickly, or attempt more complex rescues that might save more lives but could result in total mission failure if time ran out. He chose speed over perfection, adaptation over optimization. Moving through the simulation faster than safety protocols recommended, Jake began taking shots that violated every principle of careful marksmanship. Ricochet shots around corners to hit enemies using cover, bank shots off reflective surfaces to engage targets he couldn't see directly, suppression fire to force enemy movement, rather than eliminate specific threats. It was improvisation at a level that no training manual had ever contemplated. With 30 seconds remaining, on the life support countdown, Jake faced the final challenge. 12 hostages trapped in a room with 3 enemy guards, no clear shot at any target, and structural damage that made precision placement critical to avoid catastrophic decompression. The solution came to him not through calculation, but through pure instinct. Instead of trying to eliminate the guards first, Jake shot out a support beam that caused a controlled structural collapse, creating a momentary distraction that allowed the hostages to escape, while simultaneously neutralizing the guards without risking civilian casualties. The simulation ended with all hostages rescued, all enemy forces eliminated, and the facility structure intact. Total time, 11 minutes, 47 seconds. The previous record for this scenario, set by a Catherian team of 6 specialists, was 18 minutes, 12 seconds. The amphitheater fell silent as the results displayed across every screen in the facility. Jake Morrison, human marksman from Earth, had not just won the Galactic Marksman tournament. He had redefined what victory looked like. Admiral Vorthak approached the competition platform, his compound eyes displaying patterns that Jake's translator couldn't interpret. When he spoke, his voice carried undertones of amazement, mixed with reluctant respect. In 3 decades of conducting this tournament, we have never seen performance that approached this level of creativity. The Admiral paused, clearly struggling with concepts that didn't fit his worldview. You did not simply outshoot your competitors. You outthought the scenario itself. The award ceremony that followed was unlike anything in Coalition military history. Representatives from species across the galaxy watched as a human received recognition as the Coalition's premier marksman. But more than that, as the architect of a new approach to tactical thinking. The implications extend far beyond marksmanship, General Thaxelos observed during his presentation speech. Morrison has demonstrated that adaptation and innovation can overcome natural specialization. This suggests that our entire approach to military organization may need fundamental reconsideration. Jake accepted the recognition with the same quiet determination that had carried him through every challenge since arriving at the coalition. But he understood that this moment represented more than personal achievement. It marked the beginning of humanity's true integration into galactic civilization. In the months that followed, the changes rippled through every level of coalition military structure. Human recruitment expanded dramatically as commanders who had previously seen Earth's inhabitants as backup personnel began recognizing their potential for specialized roles. Training programs were revised to incorporate human-style adaptive techniques alongside traditional species-specific advantages. Sarah Chen established the first human archery corps, proving that primitive weapons could be devastatingly effective in the right hands. Marcus Rodriguez founded the Urban Combat Specialization School, teaching alien soldiers to fight effectively in chaotic environments. Diana Kozlov created the Extreme Environment Survival Program, training troops to operate in conditions that would challenge any species. Jake found himself appointed as Director of Tactical Innovation for the entire Coalition Defense Force, responsible for developing new approaches to challenges that conventional thinking couldn't solve. His office became a gathering place for officers from every species, all seeking to understand how human adaptability could enhance their own capabilities. But perhaps the most significant change was philosophical rather than practical. The galaxy had spent millennia organizing itself around the assumption that specialization was the pinnacle of evolution, that each species should focus on perfecting their natural advantages. Humans had proven that there was another path, the conscious choice to remain adaptable, to embrace change rather than resist it, to find strength and flexibility rather than optimization. "You have given us a gift we did not know we needed," Admiral Vorthak told Jake during their final meeting before Jake's promotion to Coalition High Command. "You have shown us that evolution need not end with specialization, that intelligence can choose adaptation over optimization." Jake looked out through the Admiral's office windows at the vast expanse of space where countless species lived and worked together, each contributing their unique abilities to the collective strength of the Coalition. "Admiral, I think we've all been looking at this wrong. The question was never whether humans belonged in the galaxy. The question was whether the galaxy was ready to become more human." Years later, when military historians studied the period that became known as the Adaptive Revolution, they would mark Jake Morrison's tournament victory as the moment when humanity truly found its place among the stars, not as junior partners grateful for inclusion, but as innovators whose greatest strength lay in their refusal to accept that anything was impossible. The galaxy had laughed at the human marksman when he first arrived with his primitive rifle and simple determination. They had stopped laughing after Kepler 442b, grown thoughtful after his contest with Sekthari, and fallen silent after the Prometheus rescue. By the time Jake Morrison won the Galactic Marksman tournament, no one was laughing anymore. Instead, they were learning that sometimes the most advanced solution was the most adaptable one, learning that evolution could be a choice rather than just a process, learning that a species that refused to specialize